Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. Today on this channel, I want to talk about the intersection of two terms that we've spoken about individually at length, but never looked at how they combine to create this kind of blend of new issues that tends to pertain to our romantic relationships in particular. So the concepts we're going to be looking at today are the concept of limerence or romantic obsession and the topic of toxic shame. Now, if either of these terms are unfamiliar to you completely, I will link in the description of this video individual videos I've made that go over both of those topics in depth. But if you're already familiar with one or both of those topics, you can stick around. And today we're going to talk about how they feed into each other quite naturally, as well as steps you can take to begin reversing that cycle to get yourself into more connected, authentic, real-time relationships that actually aid in your healing process from toxic shame, rather than push you further and further into it. So the first thing we're going to look at is, of course, how do these two constructs interact with each other? Those of you who struggle with toxic shame or complex PTSD, which toxic shame is a part of, already know that it can be a very isolating experience. When we live with toxic shame, that belief that there is something wrong with us, that we are flawed or broken in some fundamental way, that if anybody really saw, they would necessarily reject us permanently for, the natural solution to that problem, at least as far as our emotional systems intuitively understand it, is to go into most situations wearing a social mask. So, presenting only the version of ourselves that we believe would be acceptable to other people, and hiding all of the emotions or all of the parts of our thinking or belief systems or ways of looking at the world that we think other people would reject us for. The problem is that this means we are often hiding a very significant portion of who we are and going into most situations forming connections based on a pseudo version of ourselves, which, by the way, is not a conscious or intentional choice we make. It's something we just naturally start doing without even knowing that we're doing it very early on in our lives if we struggle with toxic shame. All of this leads to a sense of deep loneliness. Even if we have people in our lives, even if we have social groups we're a part of, even if we have a lot of surface level connections, to be constantly operating from a social mask comes with the natural consequences of burnout, which often causes us to retreat because being alone might be the only place where it feels safe to process our feelings and be who we actually are. And in that constant retreating process, we can become incredibly isolated and lonely. When we are isolated and lonely, the intuitive solution to that problem is often to begin forming fantasy connections. And in our fantasy lives, when we are experiencing limerence, that obsessive mental fixation on a romantic object, what we are often experiencing and why it often feels so good is because it is offering us a temporary reprieve from the chronic underlying feelings of shame that we feel. So imagining this fantasy world where somebody who is perfect, who we believe or have convinced ourselves is flawless, finally loves us and sees us fully and completely and believes that we are good and worthwhile and okay, means that we will never have to feel shame again. And when we are in that fantasy, we are getting a temporary reprieve, once again, from that underlying shame that encompasses much of your experience of life if you're someone who struggles with toxic shame. The problem here is that now we've made this association inside of our own minds that romantic relationships or romantic love is the thing that cures us from feelings of shame or low self-worth. And in reality, this is not at all what romantic love does. Romantic love, when it is healthy and honest and secure between two people who are not idealizing each other, but who see each other for who they actually are, in those relationships, whatever is inside of us gets mirrored back to us. So if we are people who have an overwhelming amount of shame and self-hatred and self-loathing, that's exactly what's going to get brought to the surface inside of authentic connections. And so, when we go out into the world and try to have authentic connections with more secure people, we're likely going to be met with an overwhelm of just feeling like we are aliens or freaks or there's something wrong with us. But when we form connections with people who aren't really into being fully seen for who they are, and who aren't really into seeing us for who we truly are, often because there's mutual wounding in place that's preventing both of you from being truly vulnerable with each other, that might feel a lot more similar to the kind of fantasy love that we have inside of our minds. And so, insecure love is going to feel a lot more like your internal representation of love if you're someone who struggles with toxic shame and has a lot of limerence than authentic, stable, and secure love does. So, this allows that goose chase to continue towards the idea that your self esteem will be forever healed if only you can find a perfect person and get them to love you. And this fantasy can feel like an unbelievable high. And that high can be a really nice reprieve from the lows that you are used to existing within. But if we try to force this strategy of finding a perfect person and getting them to love us enough to heal our self esteem into reality, it is absolutely going to fail for three reasons. Reason number one why this is absolutely not going to work is because there is never some sort of optimal perfect state you'll achieve that allows you to feel confident and secure and good about yourself forever. So, a lot of us who experience toxic shame have this kind of idealized self inside of our minds where we go, okay, once I look like this and feel like this and act like this and have these external things in my life, then I will be good enough to be loved and to let somebody who is also perfect into my life. But in reality, that idealized state does not exist. There will not ever be a point in our lives where we have everything figured out permanently. So, if we want real relationships, what we have to look at is what are the things that I struggle with? And what type of person is going to be compassionate towards and willing to accompany me on the journey of struggling with those things on and off, potentially for the remainder of my life? Not who is going to love me only when I'm at my best. And how do I make sure I'm always at my best in order to be loved? That is a failing strategy. The strategy of figuring out who likes the types of problems that we have and who has the types of problems that we like helping people with is the basis of secure relating. So, the bad news is that when you have relationships that are grounded in reality, the other person is going to see all of your quirks, all of your shortcomings, all of the things that you may have traditionally been trying to hide from partners. But the good news is that they could potentially be a really strong support system for you as you learn to navigate through those problems and solve them for yourself. And as you're listening to this, it might kind of feel at this point like this is an absolutely Herculean, impossible task. Like, how could you ever let someone in who sees all your weird quirks and habits and neuroses? And I think it's important to note here that all of those kind of neurotic habits you might practice often sprang into existence because you didn't have enough co-regulation at an early age. So when we are young, if we have a secure caregiving environment, we first get our needs met through sensitive and attuned caregivers who help us develop an understanding of what our needs are and how to respond to them on our own when other people are not available for co-regulation. So then we have this healthy balance of sometimes going to others to get our needs met, but also being able to take care of our own needs and respond to our own emotions as they come up in a healthy way. If when you were young, you did not have a sensitive, attuned caregiving environment, what's likely to happen is you are going to become confused about how to meet your own needs. And you might altogether reject or fail to become dependent upon co-regulation because other people don't really understand you. And because you don't have a good grasp on your own needs and feelings, you might develop very neurotic patterns of behavior that help you stay somewhat regulated in the absence of that which works better. And then you might develop shame around those patterns and behaviors and not want to let someone in to see what your life is like. But once again, if we are learning to choose our relationships based on who we're truly compatible with, we're going to find that the people we're selecting are people who've probably also struggled in similar ways and who might have their own patterns of neuroses. And so, yeah, they might come in and see all of our weird patterns and habits, but eventually, through the process of learning more about each other and beginning to co-regulate and feeling like we have a soft place to land in the world and a secure base inside of our close relationships, we're going to find we need less and less of those neurotic patterns in order to stay regulated. And this doesn't have to be something that happens in a partnership. We can find that secure base and that healthy co-regulation through therapy, through support groups, through friends or family members, if any of those resources are available to us. But the idea here is that all of those parts of yourself that you want to do away with because you believe that they are just testaments to your brokenness are actually just testaments to the co-regulation you once did not have available to you. And if you want to have a secure, healthy relationship, it's probably going to be with another person who's able to understand that that's been a part of your journey and that maybe you're still struggling with it in some respects. You are not ever going to have a secure, healthy relationship with someone who needs you to be perfect in order to love you. That is not love. That is transactional relating, which, if we struggle with toxic shame and limerence, might look indistinguishable from love to us. So that's something to be really diligent about keeping in mind. The second reason this strategy of finding a perfect person to love us in order to heal our self-esteem is bound to fail is because there are no perfect people in reality. And before you go ahead and go, no, I know my limerent object isn't perfect, I can name 10 flaws that they have off the top of my head. Ask yourself, are those flaws things that you are considering to be potential deal breakers? Like, are you looking at the actual issues that might arise in the relationship that might get in the way of you two being able to make it work? Or are you just idealizing their flaws and telling yourself that you uniquely understand them and love them enough to make those flaws irrelevant? The latter is limerence. The former is the type of honest scrutiny that it takes to navigate a secure romantic relationship. The fact that absolutely nobody is perfect and that there is nobody who is perfect for you means that you have to show up in reality to your relationships, understand what your own needs, strengths, and weaknesses are, be able to communicate them, and then find a person who's able and willing to do that with you in return. When we see a person as perfect, what we're most often doing is placing them up on a pedestal because we're uncomfortable with the idea that a romantic partner could need something very real from us as well. So often, if we find someone who seems absolutely perfect, what's actually happening is that we're just mistaking this person not expressing their needs for them not having any. And then we're assuming that they are so fine and so strong and so self-regulated that they will be available to meet all of our needs and help us heal all of our self-esteem wounds, when in reality, that is not how a romantic relationship works. In reality, romantic relationships that are healthy and secure are about co-regulation. So they're about two people coming together and sharing the whole of themselves with each other. So the good parts, but also the bad parts, and the shameful parts, and the parts that are in progress, and the parts that you truly wish were not a part of yourself or the other person, and being witnessed as you navigate through all of that. We cannot healthily co-regulate in a romantic relationship where one or both people are holding back significant parts of who they truly are and what their true experience of reality is like. There has to be a mutual willingness to see the other and be seen by the other deeply in order for a relationship to actually have legs. Now, the good news is that once you stop looking for a perfect person, your options open way up for dating and making connections, because absolutely nobody is a perfect person. And then it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, which things am I willing to work with? Which quirks or traits or kind of frustrating parts of a person don't bother me so much that it's a deal breaker? Or what kind of energies that might frustrate another person am I actually kind of happy to work with and to smooth out the kinks with inside of a relationship? This is the stuff that actually starts leading us towards who we're compatible with. But in order to figure out where our compatibilities lie in the first place, we have to drop that notion of the perfect other who is needless and can heal us from the inside out just by virtue of loving us. And the last reason why this strategy of trying to find a perfect person to love us in order to heal our self-esteem forever is not going to work is because that is not how self-esteem heals. Self-esteem does not heal through meeting all of these external standards of good enough and then constantly monitoring ourselves to make sure that we are never messing up. That is how self-hatred takes over our lives. Toxic shame starts to heal and self-esteem starts to build when we take the time to understand ourselves and give ourselves compassion around why all of these patterns developed in the first place. When we learn to be patient with ourselves around the areas where we're still struggling and still building the skills to navigate through. And when we have that compassion and that patience with ourselves, it is a lot easier to find healthy people to be in relationship with. Because if relationships are about finding mirrors, we're going to be unconsciously looking for people who mirror what's inside of us back to us. So people who have strong compassion, self-love, a good understanding of when it's time to be firm with themselves and when it's time to be gentle with themselves. And those are the things that they are going to be bringing into relationship with us because it's also what we know how to offer. And those are the types of relationships where you get that really strong support for working through the process of healing your own self-esteem, which is something that cannot be done exclusively through a romantic relationship. Healing our self-esteem is a long journey that involves a lot of self-work and finding mirrors in a lot of different places for healthier relating. But the important part of doing that work is that it's a journey of self-acceptance that happens internally and that cannot be bestowed upon us by another person. So a secure relationship might absolutely provide a soft place for us to land while we're doing that work on our own. And it might be able to give us a lot of encouragement along the way. But it is definitely not going to be swooping in and solving all of our problems for us permanently so that we never have to encounter the things inside of us that we feel to be disgusting or wrong about ourselves. The only way to heal our self-esteem is to unpack all of that, be willing to look directly at it, and find a way to give ourselves compassion around it. That cannot happen if we are chronically dissociating from it and living in a world of fantasy connection. So to reverse this process, what we have to be willing to do is develop a deep sense of intimacy with ourselves. And this is something I have a separate video on that I will link in the description of this video. But to develop intimacy with ourselves essentially means being willing to stay present with ourselves, even in the moments when we are disgusted with ourselves, when we are unhappy with ourselves, when our lives are not going the way that we would like them to go. It means failing to dissociate from those moments and deciding to show up for ourselves inside of them instead. And again, being willing to do that builds that basis of self-compassion that allows us to start choosing healthier partners when we go out into the dating world, because we're not looking for someone who's going to ignore all of the parts of ourselves that we dislike and unconsciously collaborate with us on that idea that we need to be perfect in order to receive acceptance. We're going to instead find ourselves increasingly drawn to people who know that they are not perfect and who don't expect us to be either, and who are just willing to accompany us and feel accompanied by us as we each work on building the life that we want both for ourselves and together. So instead of thinking romantic love is going to heal my toxic shame, we start to understand healing my toxic shame and working with the parts of myself that I most want to ignore and avoid is going to be the very thing that opens me up to healthy forms of love. Because deep intimacy requires me showing the parts of myself that right now toxic shame might be hiding from me to other people and allowing myself to be seen fully. We can only meet other people as deeply as we've met ourselves, right? So that's where the work has to start. I think I'm going to leave this here for today. As always, let me know what you guys are thinking, feeling, experiencing as you watch this video. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.